The snow was falling again, same as it did the day he lost her, on that porch, with one mug and 5 empty chairs. He wasn't waiting for anyone. But someone was still coming. Samuel's world had narrowed to the rhythm of quiet survival. Phi. Porch creaked under the same weight every morning, his. The kettle whistled not because anyone asked for tea, but because it always had. He repaired the porch light every Sunday out of habit, not necessity. Grief had a shape now. It filled his home with an odd comfort like a fog you stop noticing. He didn't talk much, except to his 8-year-old daughter, June, whose silence echoed his own. She understood the space grief demanded. Her eyes had learned to carry more than her years. June's presence was light, like snowfall. She moved around, him without disrupting the quiet. At night, she would wind the snow globe her mother had gifted them years ago. It played a soft lullaby, barely audible, yet it filled the room. She never asked questions about her mother. She just turned the pie knob and stared at the swirling flakes. Samuel would stand at the door, arms crossed, pretending not to watch. The days bled together, predictable and undisturbed, until the voicemail arrived. It was from Becky, a neighbor from 2 streets over. Her voice crackled through the old machine. "There's a woman down at the church. She's got 4 kids. Her folks wouldn't take her in after her husband passed. Thought you might want to know." He didn't call back, didn't even delete the message. But that evening, as the snow thickened into something almost biblical, he found himself steering the truck past the church. He told himself he was just checking the roads, but his headlights slowed as he neared the building. Through a frost-glazed window, he saw it, the movement of a small hand, wiping the condensation, pressing fingers to glass. He felt it then, that old pull in his chest. The same pull that had gotten him to every hospital appointment. The same pull that had made him hold June when he didn't know how to be strong. That quiet ache that said, "Do something." That night, June found him staring out the window, shoulders hunched. "Why were you staring at the church, Dad?" He didn't meet her eyes. "Because someone's cold," he murmured, "and I've got heat." The next morning, the snow was deeper and the world quieter. Samuel cleared the driveway like he always did. June helped, small mittens scooping powder into piles taller than her boots. But once the shovel was set down, he looked toward the truck. "Get in," he said to her. "We're going for a ride." She didn't ask where. At the church, he opened the heavy wooden door and stepped into the stillness. The basement lights flickered once before humming alive. A woman stood near the back, arms around 2 of her kids, the older one sitting cross-legged on blankets. She wore a coat too big for her, sleeves swallowing her fingers. Her face was tired, but not broken. There was a steadiness in her eyes that reminded him of June. "You Mara?" he asked gently. She nodded once. "We won't stay long, just until the storm clears." He shook his head. "It's not safe here. The pipes might freeze tonight." She bristled, proud. "We'll manage." He softened his voice. "I've got space, just until things settle." One of the kids coughed, a rasp that sounded like dust. Mara's eyes flicked toward her children. She said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, "All right." They gathered their things in silence. No excess, just worn bags and folded blankets. Samuel helped lift the smallest boy, who clung to his neck with the instinct of someone too young to question kindness. Outside, June took one look at them and held the hand of the oldest girl without a word. Their trail of boot prints melted the untouched snow between the church and the truck. At the house, Samuel showed them inside. Mara murmured thanks but didn't remove her coat. The children were too tired to speak. That night, 5 extra mugs appeared on the kitchen shelf. June placed them there without being told. After dinner, canned soup, bread, and awkward smiles, Mara's youngest toddled toward the living room and found the snow globe. He pressed his nose against the glass and tapped at the miniature world inside. June knelt beside him and showed him how to wind it. The melody filled the room like an old friend returning. Samuel stood in the doorway, arms crossed. For a moment, the silence in the house shifted. Not broken, but expanded. It held more voices now, more warmth. He didn't say it aloud, but he felt it. Something had changed, and he wasn't afraid of it. The house had never felt so full of footsteps, full of voices, full of cluttered corners and warm smells that lingered long after meals were done. It wasn't the kind of fullness Samuel had planned for, but he wasn't sure anymore if planning had ever really meant anything. It was strange to hear laughter again, not canned sitcom noise or the hollow chuckles of neighbors trying too hard. Real laughter, children's laughter. It came from rooms that had echoed for too long, now bursting with new energy. Mara's youngest liked to climb things he shouldn't, always tumbling down in a way that made Samuel flinch before he realized the boy was giggling. The girls chased each other through the hall with socks sliding across wooden floors, and June, quiet June, let someone braid her hair for the first time in years. Mara moved through the house like she'd always been part of it. She cooked by feel, chopping onions and rosemary while humming softly under her breath. Samuel didn't know the tune, but it made the air seem thicker, like something was settling in around them. The first time she cooked stew, the entire house smelled, like his childhood, earthy, savory, real. He'd stood in the doorway of the kitchen, unsure of what to say, until June tugged his sleeve and said, "She's good at making homes." He wasn't sure if she meant the stew or Mara. The kids made a mess, of course. Socks in the living room, juice, spilled on the rug, half-folded laundry that seemed to multiply overnight. Samuel sighed more often now, but not in frustration. It was more like letting out old air so new air could come in. One afternoon, he found a trail of wet footprints leading from the bathroom to the kitchen, tiny and chaotic, and instead of barking about it, he chuckled. Then, without thinking, he went to grab a towel. They didn't talk about the past much. Mara never mentioned her husband. Samuel didn't ask. He knew what that silence meant. He lived in it every day. But one night he caught a moment through the hallway's dim light. June sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the snow globe, in her lap, her back hunched in the kind of quiet that hurts to see. Mara found her first. She didn't speak, just walked over, sat beside her, and placed a hand gently on her back. No pressure, just presence. The music played faintly from the globe as the flakes swirled. Samuel stayed in the hallway, watching, not wanting to interrupt something sacred. Later that week, Mara gathered the kids at the kitchen table and introduced a ritual. "Write a letter," she said, "to whoever you miss. You don't have to show anyone. Just write it. Fold it. Leave it under your pillow. Let it go." They listened. Even the younger ones scribbled shapes they called words. June joined in. Every night after that, she folded a piece of paper and tucked it beneath her pillow like a secret. One morning, while making the bed, Samuel found one of the notes that had fallen loose. It was unsigned, written in small, careful letters. "It's not that we stopped loving you. We just had to love someone else, too." He held the note longer than he meant to, then folded it back the way he'd found it and slid it gently under her pillow. The house was full of these quiet rituals. Shared glances over breakfast, Mara smoothing the kids' hair before school, June slipping mittens onto the toddler's hands without a word, Samuel shoveling the porch in the early morning while Mara watched from the window, coffee in hand. Late one night, after the others had gone to bed and the fire crackled low in the hearth, Samuel and Mara found themselves sitting on opposite ends of the couch. They hadn't planned it. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Eventually, she spoke, her voice barely louder than the fire. "I wasn't ready to stop being someone's wife." He stared into the flames. "I wasn't ready to start being someone again." No response came. Just the soft sigh of logs shifting, the faint tap of snow against the window. They didn't move closer. They didn't touch. But in the silence that followed, something fragile began to thread itself between them. It didn't have a name yet. Few days later, something happened that cracked the air wide open. Samuel was crouching near the fireplace, helping the youngest with his boots. The boy was babbling about snowmen and mittens and breakfast when he suddenly said it, clear as anything. "Duh, help me with this buckle." The word landed in the room like a dropped glass. Everyone froze. Mara's hand, midair with a bowl of cereal, halted. June stopped brushing her hair. The older kids exchanged quick, unsure glances. Samuel looked up slowly. The boy blinked, innocent, not understanding what had shifted. Mara's expression changed. A subtle flinch, a tightening of her jaw. And then, something else, guilt maybe, or fear. Samuel set down the boot. He knelt to the boy's level, steady, calm. "It's okay," he said gently. "Names are just doors. We don't have to open them today." The boy nodded like he understood, even if he didn't. Across the room, Mara's lips trembled. One tear escaped down her cheek before she turned away. Samuel didn't stop her. He just stood there, hands at his sides, and felt something shift again. Not broken this time, just looser, like maybe the walls around them all didn't need to be so tall. The next morning, the youngest called him Mr. Boots, and everyone laughed. No one corrected him. The snow left without announcement, just a slow trickle of melt off the roof, the steady pull of warmth into earth. One morning there were patches of grass. The next, crocuses by the mailbox, defiantly purple. By the time the lilacs bloomed, along the side of the house, shoes were optional for the kids again. Samuel watched them run barefoot through the backyard, skin pale from winter, but bright with life. Their laughter sounded different now, still loud, still tangled in the wind, but deeper somehow, less like a distraction, more like a song. He stood at the base of the treehouse ladder, tightening bolts, sanding edges. A winter storm had warped one side of the platform, and the old rope swing had frayed from disuse. Mara was nearby, sleeves rolled up, digging her fingers into the cold soil along the garden bed. She hummed like always. It was different now, though, brighter, fuller. Sometimes he found himself humming too, not even realizing until June giggled and said, "That one was off-key." June smiled more these days, not just with her mouth, but with her eyes. Her shoulders sat lower. Her silences weren't as heavy. She'd started reading books aloud to the younger ones, dramatic voices and all, and every now and then she'd glance at Samuel mid-sentence like she was checking to see if he was still listening. He always was. The town church hosted its annual spring picnic once the grass grew tall enough to hide forgotten baseballs. Folding tables sagged with casseroles and lemon squares. Paper lanterns swung in the breeze. Music crackled from speakers someone's uncle refused to replace. Samuel carried a bowl of Mara's sweet potato salad, standing beside her in line for cornbread. Their presence didn't go unnoticed. The town had a long memory. Some stared, some nodded politely, some turned their backs. A man near the punch table, round face, red suspenders, eyed the group and said just loud enough to carry, "They staying long?" Samuel didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice, just looked the man in the eyes and said, soft but solid, "As long as they want." It wasn't a threat, but it didn't need to be. Mara didn't speak. She just reached under the table and squeezed his hand. Her grip was firm, steady, thankful. That night, after the kids were tucked into sunburned dreams and the house was quiet, again Samuel sat at the desk in his bedroom, the window open to let in the lilac-scented wind. He picked up a pen. For the first time in years, he wrote a letter. To no one. To everyone. To his wife. To the man he had been. To the man he might be becoming. He didn't intend to send it. But the writing mattered. One of the pages read, "They didn't take up space. They created it. In me. Around me. Like light breaking in through a wall I didn't know I'd built." He folded the letter, tucked it in the drawer beside the ones June still wrote. They were building something. These unsent words. A structure of release. A quiet architecture of healing. Then came the night of the storm. It rolled in after midnight, sudden and thick. Wind whistled through the cracks in the siding. Rain lashed the windows. Then, the lights snapped off with a hiss. Darkness swelled in the corners. Mara froze. The power outages used to mean panic, sirens, loss. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, the stairs, the exit. Samuel noticed. He said nothing, only lit candles, one by one, placing them where the children would see them, where shadows wouldn't overwhelm. A flickering orange glow filled the living room, making the space look almost holy. The kids were scared, restless. June gathered them with a blanket. Samuel sat in the middle and pulled a dog-eared notebook from the shelf. "It's one of hers," he said quietly. "A story she wrote about dragons and thunder." He read slowly, voices for each character, the kind of performance that usually embarrassed him, but the words felt safe in his mouth. So he kept going. Even Mara sat down near his feet, knees tucked under her, lips parted in a half-smile. Thunder cracked once, close. No one flinched. By the time he reached the last page, the youngest had curled against his side. Another leaned against his legs. June's head rested on Mara's shoulder. And Mara had drifted off too, her hand lightly against Samuel's arm, her breath warm against his sleeve. The storm passed in the early morning hours. Sunlight broke across the room, casting soft patterns through the curtains. Dust floated like gold in the light. Mara stirred first. She sat up quietly, brushing hair from her face, and looked around at the sleeping pile of limbs and dreams and warmth. Her eyes landed on Samuel. He was still asleep, his chest rising and falling with a child sprawled across it, another at his feet, and one tucked near his side. She leaned forward. Without waking him, she kissed his forehead, light, almost reverent. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely audible, a breath, a promise. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being our somewhere." June turned 9 on a Tuesday. The air smelled like honeysuckle, and the kitchen smelled like vanilla. She asked, boldly, confidently, as if there'd never been a time she wouldn't, for everyone to be part of it. So they baked together. Flour coated the floor. Mara's youngest insisted on cracking all the eggs, and somehow only 2 ended up with shells in the bowl. Samuel whipped frosting until his arms ached. June stood on a stool, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth as she lined blueberries in a spiral on top of the cake. No one rushed. There was no schedule, just warmth. Mara handed June a small, silver-wrapped box after the song was sung, the candles blown out, and the first sticky slice of cake devoured. Inside, a bracelet, a simple chain, delicate, with a single snowflake. Charm. "For the girl," Mara said, kneeling so their eyes were level, "who taught us to be warm in winter." June's lip trembled just a little. Then she smiled and flung her arms around Mara's neck. Samuel didn't speak, but his eyes glistened as he helped tie the clasp around June's wrist. Later that week, the past knocked on their door. Literally. Mara's sister stood on the porch, her hands tight around a car key, her face tight around some hard-earned softness. She apologized, not perfectly, but genuinely. She said the family was ready to talk now, that they understood, or were trying to. That if Mara wanted, there was a place for her, for the kids. Mara listened. She even smiled, but when she answered, her voice was kind and firm. "We already built one." She didn't turn to look, but she knew Samuel was there, just behind her. One hand braced lightly against the doorframe, silent, present. Her sister nodded. That was all. They stood on the porch for a while longer, talking, not talking, then the car pulled away. No drama, no final words, just space and understanding gently placed. Spring became summer. Summer slipped into the golden hush of fall, and then it was a year. The porch had 7 chairs now, one for each of them, though sometimes it was more, neighbors, cousins, wandering friends who found their way into the rhythm of their home. The wood of the porch had faded in spots, scuffed by bare feet and chalk drawings, worn in the way good things get. The house felt lived in, loved in, a little cluttered, a little loud, real. June sat on the porch swing with a notebook in her lap. She wrote slowly, carefully, tongue pressed to her teeth in concentration. Later, Samuel found the page folded on his desk. He didn't ask how it got there. It said, "You said miracles are loud, but I think they're quiet, like someone staying when they didn't have to." That night, after the dishes were done and the last lamp clicked off, Samuel found the snow globe where June always kept it, on the shelf near the window. He picked it up, wound it slowly, and offered it to Mara as she settled beside him on the couch. "I used to play this," he said, "when I wanted the world to pause." He looked at her. "Now I want to play it, because it kept going." The tune spun out between them, thin and twinkling. Inside the glass, the snow swirled. Mara didn't answer with words. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder, and let the silence speak. They stayed like that for a long time. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.